This is Women Are Talking from There's Nothing Wrong with You and There Never Was, and Kelly Thompson. And I am having a conversation with Meliesa Tigard today. She was just here and disappeared. So let me see if I can invite her. She may have gone to paste a link over on her Facebook page and somehow dropped herself out. She's new to the live stream process. But anyway, Meliesa and I are going to talk about our common background as fellow X2x2 cult survivors. We were both born and raised in the high control 2x2 religion that was brought over to the United States around the turn of the century from Ireland. So over 100 years ago, and operated under the radar, continues to successfully stay under the radar in many ways. So for over 100 years, and was exposed in 2023 for pretty extensive sexual abuse. The FBI got involved, I think, last year and are investigating. But Meliesa and I will be talking about our backgrounds and how they inform the way we read culture, politics, religion, gender, power, and belonging, and why deconstructing not only religious beliefs, but all forms of conditioning matters in today's world. So we really don't know each other personally, but because we were born and raised in this same high control religious sect, which is known by outsiders as the 2x2s and the Church Without a Name, and also called by insiders the Truth or the Way. Because we don't personally know each other, but we know each other because we were both born and raised in the same high control religious sect. So I'm waiting let me see if I can contact Meliesa and see what happened. I am typing right now.
Here.
Here you are.
Oh, this is the joy of being a Gen Xer and trying to figure out technology. Hello, how are you?
Oh, try being a boomer. Okay.
You're right.
On the edge of the boomers. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't push the chat link. It kicked me out.
Okay. I won't do that. I'm glad we got you back. So I'd like to introduce you to everyone, if I can pull you back up here. Meliesa Tigard is an educator and civic organizer. She founded Confluence Indivisible, authored Little Mouse and the Purple Door. Her writing explores the intersections of education, mental health, civic life, and the psychology of manipulation. And I've been following, as she said, I've been following her writing. She's been sort of following mine. We don't personally know each other, but since we were born and raised in the same high control religious sect, we kind of do know each other. Don't we?
Our childhood were more like each other's than they were anybody else that grew up in the same town in a different religion. It's more
Yeah.
like
Yeah. So, so that is really something that I actually never in my wildest dreams imagined would ever happen, that I would have connections like the connection I'm making with Meliesa, which I'm really grateful for. And I love your writing and the way that you put words to our experience, and the way that you not only put words to our experience, but the way you expand that outward into the larger culture, because of what we are experiencing in our culture, in our society, on a, basically a global or national or an international basis,
Yeah.
and so that's going on. And so we can expand this out. And both of us, having been raised this way, can see what's happening and have a unique perspective on what's happening out there in the culture on many levels, with religion, with culture, with politics, with, the ongoing and continued increasing and expanding oppression of women that's
Yeah.
happening right now in our country, and the danger to children that this represents. Um, so anyway, there's
Yeah.
there's a lot, and we'll probably do more than one live stream because there's
Yeah.
just too much to cover, right?
Yes, yes. There's
Yeah,
there's so much, and it's like you said, it's all over our society. There's a rise in authoritarianism right now, and with that comes the oppression of women and abuse of children, and all of this is being taught as good and godly and normal, and you and I grew up in it. We know what it did to us. We know what it's done to the survivors that we are in contact with, and we recognize this, and so I feel very strongly that I need to speak out now before this gains any more traction.
yeah. Well, I'm glad you're speaking out because you're doing a really good job of that. I tend to share more personal narrative and memoir, which is also a form of advocacy.
Mhm.
And so, all of these different ways that we are reaching out to the larger world are valuable.
Yeah.
So, um, why don't we just start off by by kind of each of us talking about our different path out of the two by twos and how that worked. So for me, I'll just start real quick with a summary. I rebelled as a young adult. So I left the two by two religion as a young adult, and it was a very, very difficult, hard path. I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew that deep in my heart and my soul that something was wrong, and I something drove me to look for actual truth
Yeah.
because nobody, of course, as you know, Melissa, questions were answered with "You're just not willing." Doubts are not allowed.
Go to more
Um,
meetings, pray more.
yeah, you accept the party line, and that just didn't set with me as a young person. And I also, felt just really ostracized and had a really difficult time with the isolation that comes with being born and raised in the two by twos. I was in a secular high school,
Mhm.
and there was nobody else in that high school that was in uh, the high control religious sect that we were raised in. And so I was really isolated with that. And I looked different and I felt different. And that was from early on as a very small child going through elementary. We didn't have a private school or home school because we were following the scripture that said to be in the world but not of it. So we were sent out to secular schools for the most part and expected to be examples and lights unto the world, which is a form of child abuse, really.
It is because we were forced to dress in ways that the other children were going to bully us for, and then told that this was our job, was to be the example to them.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
we were expected to be that example. And I remember being willing to throw myself under the bus for Jesus' sake, on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And I was, so that was really painful. But anyway, so I left as a young adult. I rebelled. And Melissa, on the other hand, actually took a different route and went into a deeper level of conformity. I
Did.
was also groomed to be a worker by my mother, actually. I didn't have a specific worker choose me. I'm so grateful. I'm so
Somebody's asked,
grateful.
dressed to be bullied in what way? So let's go over 2 by 2 dress code. You can't
Okay.
hair, you can't wear makeup, you can't wear jewelry. You're supposed to be wearing dresses and they're supposed to be long and modest. So for me, I graduated high school in 1989. Everyone had layered hair and wore jeans, and I was not allowed to look like any of them. I was going to visibly stand out in any room. And when you visibly stand out in such a way that you look purity cult ish,
Yeah.
other teenagers do not respond well to this.
No, I was actually targeted as a teenager, because of that, and
Yeah.
I was, sexually assaulted and blackmailed and abused and, had no way of knowing what was happening to me or why, and no safe route to tell any adults in my life what was happening to me, and that had a profound, a lifelong, lasting effect on me that I did not even recognize until maybe 10 years ago. So
Yeah.
so that's kinda how deep that goes,
Yeah.
and it was definitely profoundly, life altering for me.
Yeah.
It was very destructive to me and had a great impact on the direction that my life went after that. So you ended up joining the work. See,
I
I was
did.
groomed to be in the work. I was supposed to be a worker, but I did not. I failed my mother, and this was a terrible pain for me that I failed my mother. So tell us about that.
So what happened for me, first of all, my dad's third generation, when he and my mother met, he was not going to meetings. She was raised Presbyterian. She came from the outside. She went to break up with him. He said, I'm going back to meetings. She said, I'll go with you. And the two of them ended up professing together. So they profess, they get married, they have us kids. His route is very different because he has always had this sort of in and out desire to leave. And so when I was 7, he then decides he's gonna stop going to meetings, writes an exit letter, and I remember my mother sitting on the, piano bench and reading us the exit letter and telling, us that our dad was no longer going to be going to meetings anymore, and we were all just hysterical, just so upset about this. And I remember one of the overwhelming things for me was, "You can leave? I didn't know you could." I thought you had to stay, like you were absolutely trapped and you had to stay. So this was sort of foundational, and I took this knowledge that you could leave and I sort of tucked it away because now I wanted to leave,
Mm. Mm.
but as a rebellion against my desire to leave and my father's having left, now I get very serious about being it. So I was 7 at this point. I professed when I was 8. I become a very serious professing girl trying to do all of the right things. Like you, I went through the bullying and the being singled out, and there were sexual assaults from boys in middle school. There was a number of different things that happened there.
Mm.
Um, and so I had all of those experiences. I tried to leave once when I was a teenager. Look back up. So when I was 14, of course, I'm the serious professing girl going to convention and writing the notes and sitting, on the front row and just, doing all of the serious things. And then I have this conversation with the overseer of my state. And I say, could God be calling me for the work? And he leaves me in that conversation with the impression that number one, I am absolutely being called to the work. I'm looking at my 14-year-old child. And that is a wild thing to say
Yeah.
to what was essentially still a little girl.
Yeah.
Because if any of you don't know, the work means you give up everything you own. It's poverty, chastity, obedience, and you're never going to get married. You're never going to have your own home. So it is an absolutely intense, lifelong religious commitment, like being a monk or a nun. And this man
Mhm.
at the age of 14 put the guilt trip on me that this was absolutely the place that I was being called to, number one. And number two, now, even at 14, I shouldn't be dating. That was not something that I could do because I was going to be headed into God's ministry, and so that was not a good idea. So now here I am, going through the normal teenage years, and every time I do get interested in a boy, it creates this intense crisis inside.
Conflict.
So
Yeah,
when I'm sitting
terrible conflict inside.
Exactly. So when I'm
Yeah,
sitting
yeah.
and dating a boy, I spend a couple of weeks trying to, like, not give testimonies and not profess and get away from it. By this time, my father has returned the 2x2s, and now my parents are a unit. And they demand that I go to meeting with them. It doesn't, we can't make you give a testimony, but you have to be there. And so then I have to sit there and be guilted about the fact that I'm, not taking part in the meeting. And the elder comes over to me with tears in his eyes. He says, "We sure wish you would come." And the guilt was just too much for me to
Yeah.
try and make a choice that I wanted. So I went back and, back and forth with the whole boyfriend and all of that. And what's interesting is that when I left home at 18, I didn't leave the 2x2s. By this time, I had tried a couple of times in my teen years to leave. By the time I actually left home, I'm deeply embedded in the 2x2s, and not that I don't leave. Someone's asking about what's give a testimony. So there is, in the 2x2 meeting, it's in a living room, and everybody sits in basically a circle in the living room. And the way that the service is structured, it's the elder will lead it, pick a hymn. Now it's time for prayer, and everyone will say a prayer. Pick a hymn. Someone will pick a hymn. They sing it. Now it's time for testimony, and every person will stand up, read something from the Bible, and then give a short statement about usually that they're not good enough and that they're resolving to be better.
Exactly.
Um,
Oh, that I would be
so
better.
yeah, it performs the service of confessional and public. So if you have done things that are wrong, other people have dirt on you. So there's a lot of very culty mechanisms here that are keeping people tied into the church. And that's the way a 2x2 meeting is structured. So when you profess that, and that's required to like enter into the church, and children often do this. That's what I did.
Yeah, I professed at age 10.
Yeah. And from that point on, you're going to say a prayer and give a testimony in every Sunday
Mm.
morning and Wednesday night meeting that you attend. That's the way that they're structured. Um, so I tried to leave a couple of times. When I went to college, I stayed with the 2x2. So I'm not entirely sure why that would have been an ideal point for me to leave. But I got maybe even more. I think, I go back and forth between this wanting to leave and using the wanting to leave to push myself deeper in. I think is kind of what happens.
I think you're still deconstructing that.
Yeah.
I
Um,
think you're still deconstructing that because I think it's very typical from what I've seen in the 2x2 dynamic to have that constant inner conflict
mhm.
and that constant feeling guilty
Yep.
because of course we're human beings and we have normal thoughts and we have normal desires and we have normal wants and needs. And so we have been taught to repress and to deny all of our wants and needs and our thoughts and not even to have thoughts of our own. So as these come up and they can feel intrusive, we feel this incredible, terrible intrapsychic conflict that is absolutely torturous. And then what I have seen people do is then flip to the other side and become very pious
Yep.
and
That's what I did.
confessional
Mhm.
and surrender and,
Yep.
oh, I'm going to be good now.
Yep.
And then they go back again and they pull away and then they're back and they go back and forth for years like
And I'm
this.
also living
Yeah.
on campus at University of Montana, and I'm living in the dorms around people who are not professing, and I'm living a double life. So I go to my university life, and there's one
Yeah.
person that's there, and then I go to meeting, and there's another person that's there. So I'm doing a track A, track B, which is very common, and also high conflict within yourself in order to keep this
Well, it's
going.
disassociation.
Yeah.
And what we end up doing for survival is compartmentalizing.
Yes.
And so we become very fragmented and
Yes.
all these different parts of ourselves aren't even aware of the other parts of ourselves. And that's the way that we survive. And
Yes.
compartmentalization, by the way, is at the very foundation of addiction, for example.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how that works.
Yeah.
So because you cannot do certain things and not have terrible intrapsychic conflict, you have to split off from yourself in
Hmm.
order to do certain things, and it becomes very compulsive. The behaviors become very compulsive.
Right.
So look where this leads into the,
And I had
Um,
my first dissociative experience at pre-K. So, like, I've been dissociating ever since. The particular brand that I specialize in is called depersonalization. When I dissociate, I can still see and hear, and I can function, and nobody around me is gonna know that it's happening.
yeah,
But for me, it feels like I'm somewhere back there looking down through the eyes, and I'm still in control of the body. And I had that sense of dissociation as a medical event happen to me, from, the age of 3 or 4 on up.
yeah,
Which is like you said, it's a very common response to this kind of a childhood. I was 19, I think, when I wrote to the overseer and offered to go in the work. I had finished 2 years of college, and I was in the middle of a 4-year scholarship. So I had, in the middle of an academic scholarship, and I was up for, a Rotary scholarship to go spend a year in Germany when the call came in that it was time for me to go into the work now. So I gave it all up. And then, of course, I had this is my testimony that I gave it all up. And this is when I just wrote this article this week about the high was real. I was at Manhattan Convention. I had all of the information for me to get this Rotary scholarship, and I was supposed to go and do a follow up with them during the middle of Manhattan Convention. And I walked to a garbage can at Manhattan Convention, and I took all of the information and I dumped it in the garbage can, and I walked away because now I was going to be going in the work and joining God's ministry. And that high that I felt from giving up the thing that I wanted so much I was taught to believe that that meant that I was doing the will of God. But what that really is your nervous system saying, "Oh, the war is over." So if there's a sense of
I'm
relief,
safe. I'm safe
it was
because there's so much conflict. There's no way to go forward
yes,
in the midst of that conflict. And, for me, I ended up, getting into trouble with drugs and alcohol because that's one way that I could try to manage and regulate my nervous system.
right?
See,
Common.
and it comes from that terrible inner conflict that's going on.
And
Um,
then they blame you for having used the drugs and alcohol and say that the reason that you left because you were superficial and all you wanted to do was party and play and live a
oh yeah,
hedonistic
because you're
lifestyle.
wild. You wanted to sow your wild oats and
Right. When the
so
truth
on and
was
so
they
forth.
set you up
And
for
you're
that.
basically, for the women, we're just basically sluts, but that's what we want if we leave. Um,
Right.
but yeah. So, but I'm really glad you brought up that particular little article about not my will but thine that
Yeah.
you wrote about on your page and posted on Substack, because and I'll just read a thing you said. Inside a high control community, you are in a constant low level conflict between your own inner voice and the community's demands.
Yep.
You want something the community forbids. You feel something that theology says you shouldn't feel. You
Yep.
sense something is wrong in a context where sensing something is wrong is itself a spiritual failure. Now, this is an impossible bind to be in. But the other thing I want to point out here, because we want to expand out beyond the high control religious context, okay, is the lack of agency.
Yeah.
We are robbed of agency from birth. We were robbed of agency from birth,
Yes. Yes.
Now that is a
Yes.
deep violation.
Yes. It
And
is.
and the thing that I would say to in general in our wider culture is that women in general are robbed of agency
Yes.
in different ways on different levels in
Yes.
many, many, many. We are conditioned, we are groomed, and so we do not even recognize what that is. So
Mhm.
for me, when I began to uncover agency after years and decades of deconstructing and not even having the word deconstruction at the time to apply to
Right.
what was happening to me. I
Right.
had to do this. I bushwhacked my way. There were no deconstruction groups or none of this language. That none of this was happening. I was on my own out there
Yeah,
in the
we
world.
jumped out of the airplane and built the parachute on our way down.
Yeah, I was, and so I had no sense of agency. So I was very passive. in a way. I was very much a target, and I mean, we are groomed to be targets, so we end up being targeted. And so I was not only a target and a victim, but I was re-victimized over and over again.
Yes, too.
And I identified as a victim, and I did not understand agency.
Right.
And responsibility, forget it. How
Whatever.
could we take responsibility when responsibility for us is for the very condition of our souls through eternity and their damnation?
And also this condition of souls around us, we're responsible for them too, because if
Oh,
you're not
yeah.
giving enough light,
Yeah.
then they're gonna go to hell, and it's gonna be your fault.
Right.
So yeah, I wanna segue off of what you just said. We were groomed from birth to be victims. Everything that would have allowed us to connect to our inner voice shut
Yeah.
off. But it was wrong, it was the
Yeah.
voice of the devil. So we couldn't actually, go with our gut with what we knew. We were taught to be passive. We were taught a fawning response. We were taught to be obedient and compliant and to completely squelch whatever was inside of ourselves. All right. We were taught that it was not acceptable for us to have boundaries. It was not okay for us to stand up for itself for ourselves. That was selfish. That was being full of self. That was not the will of God. All of these things were the ways that we were groomed. We were taught that in order to be attractive to the opposite sex, we were to be compliant and give and sacrifice and never ask for anything back. And eventually it was going to pay off. This is who we were taught to be. And then they took predators and they scheduled them to live in our homes. What do you think happened? That's evil.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
when you get right down to it,
What
that
a
is what they
system.
did, and it is disgusting.
Yeah.
So
Amen.
someone's asking, was this just the girls or the boys as well? The boys had a lot of grooming. It's not exactly the same as the girls. There's a lot of boys who were groomed and sexually abused in the 2x2s. That is a
Yeah, this is not just, children are fundamentalist indoctrination is child abuse, and it affects boys and girls. And the boys were groomed and conditioned the same as the girls. However, I would say in ways it was easier for the boys because for the same reason that in our wider culture, it's easier for the males in the sense that they have privilege
correct.
and they are given privilege and there's a hierarchy where they are above
Mhm.
and superior, and so they're entitled and they have a certain entitlement just like in our wider society. So they are also groomed, and the it's not that women are the victims of this and not the men. We're all victims of this. We are all captives and imprisoned by the fundamentalist system, and this is actually the way that it works in the wider society,
Mhm.
just not as on an obvious
Right.
as an obvious scale. So, this little cult that we were born and raised in, that was worldwide, by the way, is a microcosm of the macrocosm.
It is a fractal. I have an article on fractals, and
Oh,
it
you
is
do? Cool.
you take you take the abusive family. Well, you take an abusive person and put them in a relationship. You have an abusive relationship. Then they start to have kids. You've got the abusive family. Same dynamics, bigger scale. You take that, you widen it out. You got a cult. You take that same dynamics, larger scale. You've got some of our large bureaucracies and our large corporations. Same dynamic, different scale, all abuse dynamics. When you widen that out to an entire country, that is where you have authoritarianism and you have fascism. It is the same dynamics at a larger scale. Um,
Yeah.
Jody has asked twice about my relationship with my parents. That is a long, long story. I think we should just save that for a separate time. I'm going to give you the short answer. I am completely non-contact. And the story is long, heinous, and ugly. I did write about it in my financial abuse article. So go back and take a look.
Yeah. I would that was a good article. I would like to know how long you were in the work and what that was like for you.
I was it was under a year. So I was depressed and I slept all of the time and I was miserable. So I mean that's and bored.
Oh, good.
Work
Thank
is so
goodness.
flippin' boring. You're staying in one person's house and another, and you've never got anything to do. And I played the piano all the time just to be able to like have something to do because everybody had
That
to.
is the most boring life I can imagine.
Oh, yeah, it was very boring. and also full of, I was supposed to be full of obligations, supposed to be writing letters to people and, doing all of this stuff and having visits with people and getting ready for meeting and speaking in meetings and like, ugh, yeah, yes, everything about it was boring. Although I have to say, just as a person, I'm a performer, always have been. Put a microphone in my
Yeah.
hand and the
Yeah.
crowd's gonna have a good time. I was a circus clown for a number of years, and so this is the actual speaking in meetings was kind of fun for me because
Yeah.
I like that.
You know, I used to be told that my testimony was, like, so amazing and that,
Yeah, me too.
like, I would be 10 years I would run into people, like, decades later, and they go, "Oh, I remember your testimony when you were 10," and it'd be like, I loved that, and I really and that was the part where I was supposed to be a worker.
Yeah,
But, yeah, I enjoyed that part too.
yeah, yeah. It just depends on your
But
person.
look at what we're doing now. We both have a platform, and we're speaking out, and we're using our voice.
Yes, exactly.
And using our voice is so important.
So, let me
Voice
give
is
you
the way to heal.
it is. Let me give you a little synopsis of my time in the work. It was less than a year that I was actually in the work, and once you're in the work, you have no ability to make any of your own decisions. Meals are cooked by other people. You sit down at their table and you eat what they served. You sleep in beds at other people's houses, and you rotate every third to fifth day or so. And that's how your life works when you're in the work. As a younger companion, you have virtually no agency over anything. The older companion decides everything. So I'm eating other people's food. I start to get sick. There's a medication that I've taken before. I say, "I'd like to go get this medication." My companion says, "No, we're going to do this other thing, this homeopathic thing that I have done before, and this is a better thing for you." And I ended up getting so sick that I got sent home for surgery because I was not allowed to have any agency over my own choices. So I was home for 2 months for surgery, and I stopped in at University of Montana to, see people I just hadn't and ended up with a day in Montana in Missoula on my way back, and I stopped in at the Honors College, and they said, "Your scholarship is back today if you would like it. Come on back." Stopped in the res halls. They said, "Your room and board and your RA job is back today. If you would like it, come on back." Stop in at the scholarship office and they said, "Your side job that it was a work study position, it's back today if you would like it." And in one day, I have
Wow.
tuition fees, room, books, side money. It's all handled, and I haven't asked for anything because they're all worried about me for having, left in the middle of this. But I continue on because I'm gonna buckle down and stay in the work and do God's will. And I get hooked back up with my companion, and she believed that 20 years old was too young to be called to the work. She believed that I should have been given another 4 or 5 years before I was asked to be in the work, and that I was too immature. She's probably right. She was probably
Oh,
seeing
yeah, I
that
think she had a point.
all the time.
I think she had a point. But, I mean, I think I wanna, hear more about the "not my will, but thine" thing because, that's a really, really tricky conditioning that anybody trying to leave a high control religion right now or group of any kind or situation, um, how do they recognize, even begin to recognize their own, the difference between this programming and maybe what might be true for them?
One of the things that I noticed when I started doing retreats when they became available after the Dean Brewer, I went to a couple of different retreats. And then I also got therapy that was paid for through the X2x2 fund. And suddenly I had a lot of therapeutic tools that were available to me. And every single one of them was asking me to use my imagination. They're doing creative, imaginative tasks, and they're telling me to
Yeah.
just follow my gut. Whatever you pick, it's not going to be wrong. You have to put
Yeah.
yourself into those positions. Follow your gut. Whatever you pick is not wrong. Just do your own thing, make it your own way. So I'm at one of these retreats and they take us out and they show us the purple door in the hillside and they say, "Everybody look at this purple door. Now I want you to imagine what's behind it." It's only a root cellar, that's all it is. But it's cute, right? Because it's oddly, in the middle of the hillside. And they take us back and they give us watercolors and they say, go ahead and draw what's behind the purple door. And everyone, all these women start drawing these beautiful things, right? Because they're all artistic and creative. And I cannot draw. So because as a child, my sister's job was to be the one who was artistic and who drew. And anything that I did was going to be judged, and I was going to be told that it was wrong. So I had like shut down any of that from like early. So I become very uncomfortable with this task. And I start hearing in my head this little narrative. I've got the picture of the purple door in my head, and I've got, there once was a little country mouse, and she loved her village. And I start hearing this story, and it is a creative story about this character who's walking through past this purple door. And I then start making it into an allegory based on my own story. And in about 4 days, I had this book written, and it is an allegorical journey from me being really part of the 2x2s and hardworking and dedicated and pious and, like you said, trying to do all the things.
Good little mouse.
Right? Yeah, and we were supposed to be mousy, which never fit.
We were.
Um, and so all of this stuff, and I didn't get the track A and the track B in there. This is little mouse telling her story as though the track A was the only thing that existed. And then we go through what ultimately happened that drove me out of the 2x2s, which was an assault by an elder. So that is done allegorically in the book. And when he physically pours the mushroom tea onto her, trying to get it into her mouth, and she gets herself away, and she goes down to the marketplace to try and get help. And as she asks for help, they say, "Why is the mushroom tea on you? Only worldly mouses drink mushroom tea. You're not in this marketplace anymore. This is closed to you." And that is victim blame. The ugliness of the story sticks to the woman who is telling what happened to her.
That's a beautiful analogy.
And the man who did it isn't in the scene.
Of course not.
And the ugliness of the story, she's the one who has to tell it and relive it. And he gets to be somewhere else going, "What? I didn't. I'm married. She hit on me. And I told her no." That, so I've heard versions of that story over and over and over again. And then little mouse, obviously ultimately she goes through the purple door, and there's a guide that happens in the second part of the book that is based on the therapists that worked with me. And the guide is then telling her essentially to listen to her own inner voice. And the whole thing was a creative process. And so I went ultimately after that and created a journal to go along with it, where it takes you theme by theme through what I was doing in the book, and then asks you to write or draw or explain or, find a way to interface with your own story, because it is the connecting to your own inner voice, which you're going to have to do over and over and over.
Yes.
You're going to get it in a day.
I will testify to that.
That is the healing process. It is
I'm really glad that the conversation went in this direction. I actually meant to bring the purple door and show it, and I forgot to bring it. It's in my it's in my house here. But I just wanted to say that's the direction you went in toward creativity.
Yes.
It's so beautiful. Art saves. Art saves.
Yes.
So please draw, dance, move, write, speak.
Yes.
And like Meliesa said, you have to do this repeatedly over, and you have to practice, and we never get at this perfect place where we've got it, but we do retrieve all of these fragments and these pieces of ourselves, and we can find the wholeness that has always been a part of us. And not a part of us, the wholeness that underlies everything that was, shattered and repressed by the conditioning and the grooming, and so that we didn't even recognize it. But art will take us back there.
Yes,
and this book that Meliesa wrote is a perfect example of that with the workbook. So where can they get this?
Amazon. So Little Mouse and the Purple Door, it's all under Purple Door Journeys. Everything that I've done is on Purple Door Journeys. You can find all the links at Purple Door.
And that's the name of your Substack.
Yep.
It's at Purple Door Journeys.
Yep.
So, and
And
my Substack, by the way, is called, now wait for it, There's Nothing Wrong with You, and There Never Was.
I
Did
love
you
that.
hear that?
Love
There's
that.
nothing wrong with you, and there never was. I want you to let that in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you. So yeah, purpledoorjourneys.com, Purple Door Journeys at Space Substack, Purple Door Journeys on Amazon. Makes it easy. I branded it so that it would be so that you could find all my stuff. There's two books, the Little Mouse book, the Little Bee book, which is based on Little Mouse's sister. And because in the first book, Little Mouse gets a key in the mail from her sister and doesn't really quite know what it's for and where it came from. Book 2 gives you the origin of the key, and also takes you through a journey that is based off of my gay best friend. Because in these high control journeys, in these high control churches, it's not okay for you to be anything other than a binary red or blue. And this is a character who is a rainbow in a world where everyone's being told you have to either be a red or blue. And so she's taught to paint over her
Okay.
true self from her earliest memories. And when she gets bold enough to actually take off the paint off of her tail and show the rainbow that has always been there, there are consequences because it's a high control community.
Yeah, the big consequences.
And she has to find
Yeah.
her way then to her chosen family and to Rodent City, which we find out is the name of the place where Little Mouse got to in the first book. There are 2 more books planned. I have more journeys that I want to tell. For me, the first one was autobiographical. The second one was very close to my heart because I have LGBTQ friends that are very close to me and have seen how those stories went. Journey number 3 is going to be the story of the character you meet as Ophelia in book 2, who comes back as Phil in or excuse me, you meet Ophelia in book 1. Same character comes back in book 2 as Phil. So book 3 is going to have to pick up with Phil's story, telling you what it was like to have lived and put on this costume and had to pretend to be somebody that he was not, and how he found his path. And there is an alligator that has been drawn into both of the books. If you'll find in these little Easter egg right now in several scenes, that is going to pick up in books 3 and 4. And that's going to tell another story because we know that one of the things that people in high control communities like to do is adopt kids from foreign countries, adopt kids who are ethnically different than themselves. And how that actually looks and how it turns out and what those people's story actually is one that deserves to be told. So that's what Io the alligator is going to.
Yeah, that's another whole can of worms, the adoption and the 2x2s.
Yes.
Yeah. But I love this beautiful creative journey of healing and and the way that that's been channeled and expressed and is coming through you to help others. Um it really is a beautiful thing, and I think, like I said, art is definitely, expressing. We need to speak, we need
Yes.
to speak, and we need to speak in whatever way we can. Some of us speak through movement, some of us through,
Yes.
color, through, voice, through writing. It doesn't matter.
I was
Find what it is for you,
I was
and,
given an assignment to draw and I wrote a story. That is
Yep.
the listening to your inner voice lesson. So it doesn't matter what your medium is. It matters that you connect to your authenticity because that's what we were told to shut down. And we also know that in high control religion and in high control governments, art is severely censored. There's what's
Of
okay
course.
and there's what isn't. And it is breaking the binaries where we get out there and we do what it is that is inside of us and that's real, and we connect with that without apology. That's where the healing happens.
That is where the healing has happened for me.
Mhm.
For me, it's almost like, okay, we definitely are given a false, we develop a false persona from being
Yes.
born and raised in a high control group. I mean, and that's one of the differences is that there are people who convert to high control groups. And then there are people like us who are born and raised, and it's generational. So this goes down through generations in this religious sect
Talk
that
about
we came up in.
Yeah, and let's talk about the cost of that because we were not allowed to have an actual self. So
Right, right.
psychologically, through all of our formative years when we were supposed to be developing self-identity, we were allowed group identity, identity as a professing girl. We
Yeah.
were not allowed self-identity, and every time self-identity came up, it was rigidly controlled or punished.
Yeah, we were actually not allowed to, have our own language. So the language in my that I und wha it didn't come from me. I didn't have my own words. I didn't have my own language. I had to develop it. I'm still finding my language. It's the, inventing my own poetics. So, putting words to this, like we both are putting words to this experience, but that's a big part of the process is finding the language. When you've been deprived of language, of your own inner language, your inner relationship with yourself, which doesn't exist because it's been denied you.
And I didn't what when I left the 2 by 2s, then I had to decide what was my morality? What was my ethical
Oh
code?
yeah, yeah. All
Who
bets
am
are off. All bets are off.
Right, exactly. So the amount of rebuilding of the psyche that we have to do after we leave as adults that just were building blocks that are there for normal people that we were not allowed to have, it is extremely psychologically damaging. I know some people who grew up 2 by 2 who have some pretty personality disorder and what's the other word I'm looking for? Psychic or excuse me, not psychic. Where complete break from reality. Psychotic. That's it. Psychotic break from reality.
Psychosis. Yeah,
So like you said with the drugs and the alcohol and the addiction, like there's some really big mental health consequences
yeah.
for us for not having been able to have developed a sense of self. And I started in therapy the summer that I left home when I was still a 2 by 2. I had myself an appointment at the counselor's office at the university every single week until I left for the work, and then I came back from the work, and I got back in, and I was seeing a therapist and working on mental health journey stuff, and it took 5 years of that before I was ever even able to leave the 2 by 2s. Um, and
Yeah.
so it was a long, intense therapy process for me that then,
That's an understatement.
what's that? Yeah,
That's an understatement. I mean, for me, I'll just say that, it's been a long, long journey of deconstruction and recovery, and it began for me at age 30 when I got sober and into recovery, and that was the beginning of my journey to self, to come home to myself, and to find the self that I never had any contact with, or that wasn't allowed to exist.
yeah,
And that journey continues to this day. And when the two by twos were exposed,
yeah,
recently in 2023, that was an absolute mind blower for me because I did not imagine in my wildest dreams that I would ever be validated for the
yeah,
journey that I undertook, which was really an incredibly heroic journey.
yeah,
Um, Really, and I know that for you too as well, Melissa, and for all of us. It really truly is, and I hope that anyone who is embarking on that journey gives themselves the permission to do that, and that those critical voices do not drown out the spark that's left inside, because I guarantee you that spark is there, and that there is nothing wrong with you, and there never was, and that will be a process of discovery, and that's where I ended up in the after 40, 50 years of working on this. Of this recovery for myself, I ended up with understanding truly and deeply that there's nothing wrong with me, and there never was. And that's a discovery. It's not an idea. It's not a slogan. It's an actual reality.
mhm.
And that's an amazing place to be. And I'm really grateful. And I want to share that with everyone else because it is really true for everyone that We are all conditioned and we are all programmed and we are all influenced. Now, we don't have to write that all off as evil or something, but it is helpful to become aware of the ways that you were taught and conditioned and programmed regarding gender, regarding every race, regarding, your inclinations, regarding the world, the worldview. This all did not come from inside you unless you were really fortunate and very, very incredibly rare and had parents who were actually aware and enlightened and able to parent you based on who you are
Yeah.
versus an idea of what a child needs to be and versus an idea of what they need to repair in their own childhood versus an idea of how children should be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a very worthy, a very, very important journey wherever you are in your life, just beginning this or down the road. I commend you. I commend you.
And one of the things that I also like to tell people who are leaving these high control groups is to really acknowledge how difficult it is. We do these
Yeah,
things that are self-blame of why didn't I leave earlier? Why didn't I, et cetera? Why didn't I? Why didn't I? Because it was too hard. Because everything in it was set up for you to never be able to leave. The fact that you actually did leave is the miracle, not that you left so late. Because let's be honest, there's people who are still in it.
yeah.
People who are
There are
involved.
people who never made it out. My mom and dad died in this way
Mine
in
too.
recent years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My dad tried to leave multiple times and never made it out. His mother tried to leave several times. She ended up dying back in the religion after having been excommunicated for 30 years for having been divorced. Which side of the divorce line are you on? Is it allowed divorce
Oh my God.
in Colorado? Because I know in there are
In
people.
Colorado was more progressive along those lines from what I understand. I do know that I had a sister who got divorced and was condemned for that reason and, struggled and struggled, whether or not she could take part in meeting. And this was in Colorado, but in more recent years, I think that they became a little less severe here, but it depends on the state and the region, as you know. But one thing I do want to say real quick is and acknowledges that just because we physically left a high control group does not mean we left. So unless that is deconstructed in your mind and you do the work of liberation,
Yes.
you have not really left. And there are very many people who do not actually leave, who believe they've left, who find an maybe easier, softer way to survive, but they haven't really left in their head. They're continuing the same behavior and the same kind of thing, just in a different form.
A lot of people leave one high control group and go to another high control.
Yeah, yeah.
It'll be and there's a number of people, well, several people who are in the 2 by 2 work who came out of the Hutterites. So
Oh
the
my God,
Hutterites
really?
were super high control. These kids escaped the Hutterites and ended up in the 2 by 2s that felt familiar to them because it put constraints on them. It just wasn't the communal
Oh,
living of
well, those were always the stories where, oh, they converted to the real truth.
yes. And there are people who leave the 2 by 2s and then end up in some other evangelical sort of really, tightly controlled, and it's very
Or
simple.
even a mainstream Christian church. I mean, you can go to a mainstream Christian church, and that's, I would never dictate. From where I come from, I would never dictate someone else's choice of religious belief and church and how they choose to find spiritual meaning in their life. I would never say that, but I will say that it's easy to go into a mainstream Christian church and believe that you have done the work and you've deconstructed, but you haven't. You've just really found a more safe haven.
Yep.
So, and then again, it's like you have to be where you are too. And maybe that's where you need to be for a while. And that's okay. It really is.
I went through a lot of magical thinking because I when I left the 2 by 2s, I left Christianity, but I was still very into magical thinking, and I was crystal gems and rocks and woo-woo and spirituality and, so way over into something that was new agey, and I ultimately that was a path for me, right? So I was very, I believed in a lot of things that didn't really have any basis in fact.
But
Um,
it helped too. It helped you, right?
right,
Yeah.
exactly, and that was the path for me ultimately led to a much more rationalist, let's go with what we do know and base our decisions off of that and not make assertions that we can't actually back up with fact. And for me, that's why I call myself an agnostic because I'm like, there's plenty of things that we don't know. And I'm just allowing for the fact that there's things that we don't know. And I actually, my pastor said to me recently, he said, "Well, I think like anybody who's really into the mystery of Christianity is going to become an agnostic." So this is interesting because he and I, like, I consider myself a secular person and an agnostic and a maybe pantheistic is kind of where I'm at. And he considers himself under the umbrella of Christianity. But when we get down to the nuts and bolts of what we believe, it's pretty much that it's very similar every single time. So that's just
We
a
just have different ways of expressing the same thing, which is
right,
what religion is.
right.
Depending on the country and the culture, it's just another way to express wisdom and truth that gets, of course, distorted by, human
And
insanity. But
if we're going to really agree that connecting with your inner voice is the healing space, then we have to acknowledge that every person ever born onto the planet had their own inner voice and their own ability to connect to whatever that is, call it divine, call it God, call it whatever. That being the case, all of the goodness of what is and the wisdom and the spirituality does not just exist in people who come from one particular strand of religion. Every person ever born had the ability to connect to their own inner
yeah,
and that means there's wisdom in all of the religions.
that was one of the main stumbling blocks for me in leaving the 2 by 2s was the belief in exclusivity,
Yep.
and that it was the only way, which I don't know, my intellect was completely neglected, but it just even on its own, it was like, this does not is not logical, not rational, and, as a child, I would cry in bed, for the neighbors because they were going to hell, and I didn't understand
Yep.
why these nice people were going to hell, and it was just horrible, and then, of course, we were taught that we were the only way, and
And
that
my mother's family, who was all Presbyterian, they were all going to hell.
oh, yeah, yeah.
And that's
So,
I was raised to think
yeah.
grandparents were going to hell. I mean, that's kind of awful. And that's and I was raised to think that my step grandfather wasn't a grandparent, even though my grandmother married him before I was ever born. But he was always called by his first name and never identified as an actual grandparent because my grandfather and grandmother had gotten divorced in the 2 by 2s, and he had stayed faithful by staying single. So her second husband was never acknowledged. Like, what a slight that man my entire life existed in this state where he was never acknowledged as the grandfather that I grew up with. It was not until I was in my probably around 30 that I went to introduce him to my best friend that I realized how I was about to introduce him as my grandmother's husband, and then went, "This guy's been your grandfather your whole life. Maybe you could let go of that one now."
Yeah. We are coming to the end, and I love that we're at this point where we can, end on this
Mhm.
um, all-inclusive, embrace of humanity in
Yeah.
all its forms and all of its shapes and all its beliefs and all and that there is no single one way to do anything, and I really encourage everyone who is listening, of course, I respect your beliefs and wherever you are, but I really encourage you to um
Oh, I don't hear you. Allow for the possibility that other people might also have their own connection to the divine.
yes, 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 that was where I was going, that everyone is divinely connected, and whatever way that we understand that, whether it's secular or spiritual, it doesn't matter. Everybody has value. Uh,
Mhm.
that is our birthright. We are born with absolute. What I believe in is the original blessing. The
Mhm.
original blessing. So we need to end, and I think we should talk about the fact that we will come back and do another session.
Definitely.
Don't you
Yep.
think?
Oh, there's
Would you
there's
like that? I'm so glad I met you. This was
Yeah,
an
me too.
amazing and
Me
this
too.
was our first conversation and our connection, and we did it, in front of Substack.
Yes, exactly, however many people. And there's a lot more to talk about what a 2 by 2 childhood looks like,
Yeah,
what and the layers of control, like you said, we started doing this deconstruction and we didn't even know the word deconstruction. I said to a friend of mine the other day, I went
yeah.
through religious trauma when none of us knew that religious trauma was a thing. We all saw me doing it,
Yeah, there
but
was no I went to therapist, and no therapist would even allow me to talk about religion.
yes,
It was off the table. It was not allowed in the therapy room. There was
yes.
no talking about God.
Yeah,
So,
and
yeah,
we needed to be able to deconstruct the way that we were harmed by religion, and now we're getting more and more resources, and that's ultimately that's why I wrote the books and then added the journals to the books, because what I see is that in the religious trauma space, there aren't enough resources. And so if there
yeah,
aren't, because I'm an educator, because I've had the access to all the therapy that I have had, I know what I need, and I can put that into a book and a journal
yeah.
and put it out there, and other people can build off of that. Go ahead, go build
That's
it.
beautiful. I love it. I've got a little on my navigation bar, a sort of resource, um, page for
Mhm.
high control groups, resources. So you can look there. You're listed on it, by the way.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
so you can look on the navigation bar and check that out. And I also just wanted to mention real quick. Oh, and you can read my post because all of this stuff is, I'm telling my story in many different ways and in personal narrative and memoir. So you might find some value there. But also, I am going to be doing a Women Are Talking, which is a section of my Substack, Women Are Talking, which Melissa and I just did. We talked.
Mhm.
And that's what I do, Women Are Talking live streams, and I'm going to do a Women Are Talking Zoom meeting, and I just wanted to throw out a plug for it before we close. And it's going to be at 5 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, Tuesday, June 30th. I will be sending out a Zoom link free to all subscribers, and it goes out on Monday. So look for that in your email. If you want to join that Zoom group, it's going to be open. It's not it's all inclusive, open discussion rather than a teaching or a webinar or anything like that.
Mhm.
So we're just going to hang out and talk. Women.
Cool. I am on Crystal Styles Mant has a group. It is the X2 by 2 cult survivors group, and I'll be on the live on there on Wednesday. So
Nice.
can see me there on Wednesday. And actually, Monday, I'll be on a local show called Street Talk with Mike Magnotti. And we're going to be talking about Christian nationalism and what's happening here in our local community
Yeah.
and the rise of the Christian right and their attempt to take over our local governments.
Yeah. We'll have to have a live stream about that too. All right. Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad we met and connected.
Me too. So glad. We'll get together again soon.
All right. Bye bye.